A peer-reviewed study published this month confirmed what scientists have long feared. The pace of global warming has nearly doubled in the last decade, and 2025, a La Nina year when temperatures should have dropped, came in as the third hottest year on record. The cooling year didn't materialize. So the world has a response system for this. It's called the COP process. Nearly 200 countries meeting every year to negotiate climate action. But most people only see half of it. They see the negotiated track, governments working through language line by line. What they don't see is the action agenda, a coalition of the willing. Policymakers, cities, investors, and businesses who commit to building solutions without waiting for full consensus. At COP30 in Belém, Brazil, did something no previous host had done. It turned that coalition into the implementation engine running alongside the formal process. 30 goals, each requiring a concrete delivery plan. 480 initiatives across 190 countries. At the center of it all is Dan Ioschpe, appointed by the President of Brazil as COP30's high-level climate champion. His mandate runs through COP31 in Turkey later this year. He built Ioschpe Maxion into a 17,000-person industrial company across 14 countries. He's not a diplomat. He's an industrialist who believes the climate fight needs people who know how to implement and scale solutions, and then receive the mandate to prove it. The COP summits last just 2 weeks, but the work between them is where everything either moves or dies. Dan Ioschpe owns that gap, from Belém through Turkey. This conversation is about what he, his team, and partners are building in the space between the summits. Dan, it's really nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. And it's just a real pleasure to be able to share with the world your insights and your perspective on what's going on. You have a huge role right now, and a very important role for all of us. So thank you for your contributions. And I'd like to start really perhaps understanding how you got into this role and why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be in this position and to be here with you today. I think I was invited by the Brazilian government. The host country has this possibility to invite someone to be the high level champion for that year, for that cycle, and for the subsequent year until you begin the next COP, like we will start in November, the Antalya COP in Turkey. So the Brazilian government invited me. I had some experience with the B20, which is where the business gathers for the G20, which was held in Brazil in 2024. And I was then invited by the National Confederation of Industry of Brazil to lead that process. And then I interacted a lot with the Brazilian government, and maybe that was the reason why they invited me. But I think they wanted a very practical approach to the action agenda, and to make those wheels turn quicker and on a more efficient way.
Can you tell us a little bit about this history? I mean, the transition from a only, let's say, government-led initiative to now, just the history of how we got to where we got now, and how this action agenda got started and is now taking off.
Yeah, well, I'm not the best person for that, to be very honest, because I'm also fairly new to the system over the last couple of years. But I, as understand, Paris was a major point 10 years ago, when you finally reached some commitments among the parties, and parties mean federal governments, and there are many, around 190 governments sitting around the table and having to agree on full consensus. That's very hard, and they did agree by then in the targets that they needed to achieve in order to avoid a overheating of the planet and all the impacts that we have been calling this climate crisis. So at that point in time, with a objective to be achieved, the notion of an action agenda became more clear. And that's also when it starts to have this figure of the high level climate champion, which would be the link between UNFCCC, United Nations, the parties, and all the remainder of society. Over time, this position grew a lot, and gathered a group of professionals that work around the clock every year. The champion is not a professional in that position. He is and invited for that role, and he's doing his pro bono activity in the benefit of that cause. But then you have around last year, we had around 80 people in the Climate Champions team, which are experts from around the world that understand the solutions, the technologies that are being dealt. And this group interacts with all the initiatives, with all the organizations around the world that are dealing with those challenges and those objectives, trying to get to the best solutions and positions and networking enough to make them get with each other to achieve the best solutions, because usually we're talking about very complex issues that demand interaction among actors, among governments, among regions, and all this suing, let's say, all this networking activity has to be done on a very professional way. So this is more or less the history. And I think as we got to Belém, the Brazilian leadership, especially the president of COP30, Ambassador André Correia do Lago, he came up with this position saying, listen, negotiation is very important, and it has been the core of COPs. But by now, we have sufficient negotiation to deliver the Paris Agreement, which was the 10-year ago mandate of the parties to global society to get this job done. So I think he's right in saying that, of course, there is a lot more negotiation to come up, and every year there will be new negotiation. But we don't need additional negotiation to deliver what has been agreed. So, what Brazil started to do more probably than the previous editions was to put more focus on the implementation, and that means the action agenda. So at the end of the day, you have two very relevant things going on in any COP: the negotiation and the action agenda. By now, the action agenda is gaining more traction because it's the one that talks directly with implementation, and implementation is what will decrease the emission, what will improve the adaptation front, and at the end of the day, will take us towards the Paris Agreement objectives.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to look at it, we can set targets and the targets are missed, right? And if we don't actually get capital and the actual private sector really involved, we're not going to see change. When you look at the action agenda, who determines what the action agenda is? Is it tied to anything particular, or is this settled at another layer?
No, the story about the action agenda is that it talks all the time with the global stocktake, which is also connected to the Paris Agreement. So, how do you achieve the Paris Agreement? That's the bulk of the story. And then when you break down by country, by activity, you start finding out where are the big ticket items. And of course, you should put a lot of effort to make those happen, because if those happen, then your chance to achieving the objective increases. And that's a bit of the perspective of the private sector. And that's maybe why I was invited, going back to your previous question, because of course we have amazing people which are passionate by what they're doing, and that needs to go on. But we also have to be careful to make sure that some of those heavy items are dealt with, because eventually, if we don't achieve them, we may do a lot of things but be very shy or very short of the objective. So, the way to balance this is to make sure that some of the transportation subjects, cement, steel, and some of the big ticket items, or the so-called hard to abate sectors, are in there: forest, agriculture, food systems, that we are dealing with them enough to have some confidence that even if we are delayed, as you say, in some areas, we are moving towards the objective and getting close to the solution. So that's sort of where the action agenda is now. The action agenda is a voluntary subject, so it's non-governmental parties that are working around the world and around the clock to implement those solutions. There is a lot of socioeconomic development related to it, as I like to say. It's not like uh, an environmental subject, it is also an environmental subject. It's very much more of a socioeconomic development subject, and it's a competitive issue. Because when we talk about, for instance, transportation, and we use sustainable aviation fuel as an example, as you get close to the solution, it becomes a very significant competitive issue, meaning that if you have not get ready for that as a company or as a system, you're probably going to be in a very tough position. And that's what we see in real life. So it's not like a similar angle story. At some point in time, these things they move very quickly, and whoever is not ready later on feel very bad about it. And our task is to make sure that we are talking a lot about this, sharing the solutions, sharing the perspectives, putting everybody together, and also a bit over your question of history. I think what we draw for COP30 was slightly more organized way to attack the problem. So we came up with this six axes that are talking totally with the global stocktake, which is a approved view of the parties, of the governments on how to pursue this. Then we have 30 key objectives. Out of these 30 key objectives, gathering all of the existing initiatives which are registered in a portal called NASCA portal that belongs to United Nations. We found out 482 existing initiatives which started to work in a more organized way within a system. From those 482 initiatives, until COP30, we reached 120 plans to accelerate solutions, which are very specific plans talking about a specific problem, a specific solution to debottleneck that subject and get to the finish line. And this has been going around the weeks and the clock. So these groups they keep meeting and they keep calling on whoever they need to call to find a solution to debottleneck. And there's a lot of support of international development banks, consulting companies, think tanks around the world, which, for the competitive sake as well, want to be very close to those initiatives, to those plans to accelerate solutions. So that seems to be working fairly well, and we are gaining traction and efficiency. So at COP30, as you probably saw, there was a lot of attention to this so called climate action agenda because we were getting very close to tangible, to specific themes and relevant themes. So the
Yeah,
more tangible, more relevant,
yeah,
easier to work.
I was shocked at the amount of detail. I mean, I did some deep diving, and it was much more detailed and well structured than I ever imagined. And
Yeah.
you know, from the granary of solutions to the plans to accelerate solutions, and just roadmaps in general. I mean, it seems like there's a taxonomy challenge a little bit of like where does everything fit in, but there were a lot of initiatives going on, and it was really impressive. And
And
where
just sorry, and just because you mentioned, and I forgot to mention, the granary of solutions was also a very important piece of this architecture, because there we just plugged real life stories that are already happening. Because sometimes you have someone in, let's say, Australia, which is not exactly familiar with what is being done, let's say in Mexico, and you have a solution in Mexico which was not thought in Australia. So the granary has this function of inspiring with real life stories to make it a speed up process and scale up process. So that's also a very important part of the architecture. And by the way, for COP31, at the end of COP30, the parties agree on a 5 year strategy for the action agenda. So the party said, this is working, we want another 5 years at least, but we want to add an additional layer because an initiative, those 482 initiatives, they require a lot of organization of their members. It's not easy to become an initiative. So we are coming up for COP31 with a initial entry point because we want everybody to be engaged as much as possible. Of course, there is some level of sophistication to do anything, but we will have this so-called communities of action where we will be able to include starting ideas which are not enough to be an initiative, and eventually they can bundle or they can talk to the initiative. So we hope to be more adherent as we move forward.
Amazing. Yeah, I actually had the privilege of having our project exposed and for what we were doing in the circular economy space in Brazil with bio waste and a very advanced market actually in terms of the structure, the what would you call it, the regulatory structure for the circular economy. Unfortunately, it hasn't really taken off yet. I mean, Brazil, most countries around the world, not just Brazil, have a long way to go. But I think there's something happening in Brazil. In my conversations with Europe and with the United States and other locations, it shows that there is real something very interesting that's happening from a circular economy perspective in Brazil that I hope will be able to translate to more developed countries and maybe even lesser developed countries. So I'm very interested in understanding how that works. Um,
And by the way, sorry to interrupt you, but a circular economy will be probably a number one subject at COP31. Turkey is very committed to that, and they are preparing, and they see correctly that anyway, circular economy crosses all of our 30 key objectives of COP30 in one way or another. So be ready because circular economy will move faster than before for sure.
that's great to hear, and I know that one of the persons leading, right, the next champion comes from a zero waste background as well. So
Yeah.
that'll be fantastic. And for those who don't know what zero waste is, it's essentially a very it sounds impossible target, but it's about diverting waste in general from landfills and circulating products. And these targets are very achievable, and they can have dramatic improvements in preservation of the environment. Right, we have to extract less, and we're also reusing materials more. So, I'm very excited to hear about that. And you know, going on into that COP, into that next COP in 31, and you talked about the circular economy. How does the relationship between Brazil and Turkey work, and how does that handoff happen? Is this something where you are working side by side already, or is this something that's being built or planned still?
I think we are working side by side. I think it's fair to say that the home country at some point in time speeds up and gathers so much energy, information, and resources that it tends to go faster. But we are at the very interesting point where they got to know everything that was done. They are ready, they have a very good structure to work along, and they're leading the process along with us. Turkey is defining its key objectives and its priorities. That's also part of this architecture we built. We don't we did not intend to have 30 fixed key objectives over time. We believe that the host countries, the geographies should play a very significant role because the world is big and we need all these different topics. So of course, forests for us in Brazil was an amazing subject with a lot of things to do. Eventually, as we have also Australia together with Turkey, oceans will be a very important subject, and we have the islands around Australia also part of the organization. And Turkey is bringing the circular economy, zero waste concept as a very strong idea. So it's a joint work between the presidencies of the COPs and the champions. My colleague, which is the COP 31 champion, Samed, is completely involved in this. And by the way, even though the decision for Turkey was only at the end of last year, by Christmas and by the beginning of January, they were ready to go and they're working very well and getting very much organized to make an amazing cycle. I'm very confident that we will bring this architecture and those concepts to an even higher level because as you exercise the process, you get better, as in any company, as in any sector, as in any organization. So my expectations are very positive, and we will work along with them throughout the process.
Amazing. It's been more than almost 25 years since the last time I was in Turkey, so it's going to be fun to be there again. One of the most fascinating visits, and from a cultural perspective, just incredible. And since we're talking about the circular economy still, and what the potential is for what we will see in Turkey, and taking it a level deeper, organic waste, right? Organic waste is one of the great challenges that we face, right? It's 50% of global waste, and it mixes with everything else, contaminates it, and makes it very hard to treat. And at COP30, we had the now, right? No organic waste.
Yeah.
pass. And do you see that being a the main driver? Is that going to be a really big thing come Turkey? Is this something that's already being talked about right now?
Uh, it will be a very significant subject. I
Hmm.
don't like the idea of the main because there are so many important subjects. And again,
Right.
we cannot let go some of these very large subjects that take a lot of time. Again, as an example, the sustainable aviation fuels or the maritime fuels or cement or steel,
Yeah.
they will take time, and if they're not moving in that right direction, we may get up to 2033, 2034, and be in a very negative position because we did not move enough with those very sensitives and hard in terms of technology and solution or economics to get them addressed. So we need to move with those subjects. We may say, okay, maybe 30 is too much, but it's not going to be one.
Yeah.
There are many subjects that need to move forward, and over time, like we will move in the subsequent year to Ethiopia. So of course, some of the dilemmas, some of the challenges will be different, and we need to continue to address them. But we cannot lose the continuity of those subjects that we have been working with, because if we do that, then we probably go back to stage zero, and then when we get there. Uh, Down the road, we say, oh, now it takes
Yeah.
10 years, 12 years to develop. If you look at sustainable aviation fuel in terms of infrastructure to produce the required volume, it's not a 5 year subject. It's more of a 15, 20 year subject. So you really need to continue to go on all of those key aspects.
Yeah, I've heard it, Durwood recently in the last conversation that I had, he brought up the fact that we're talking about the marathon and the sprint, right? It's like what can slow climate warming right now? We're a lot of big focus on the super pollutants and on methane, which is part of what we were talking about before. And then the marathon being, decarbonizing industries in general and ultimately then carbon removal as well. Like these tracks need to happen all at the same time. Sometimes we get stuck, oh, this is the thing that's going to solve everything. And actually, we need to work on all fronts simultaneously, right?
Yeah, and maybe also to your example, which was very good, you need some leading cases that took a while. So
Mm.
when you talk about carbon removal, uh, you're starting to see in Northern Europe some effective uh, solution with infrastructure, with made financial commitments. And then you have places like Brazil, which are starting to move on that direction with some legislation, some projects and solutions, because they are also seeing that this is working uh, on an interesting way somewhere else. So you need these leading stories around the world to make sure that the rest of the world moves towards them as they get more material, more significant, and then goes back to competitive subject as well. Nobody wants to be far behind from any aspect, especially on the non-public sector, on the private sector. So that's a very interesting dynamic that we need to keep moving forward.
When you sit back now, you're talking about this and the challenges, and I wonder, from your background, um, finance plays such a big role, right? How do you direct capital to the right projects? How do investors look at this space and say, hey, where am I going to get most impact, most bang for my buck, and where am my climate investment? Um, how does that work? I mean, you're talking to development banks, big banks. I come from a finance background as well originally. How is from the outsider's perspective, who really don't know how this really works, like we don't see it, right? How does this get coordinated and directed? If do you have any insights you could provide on that?
I think it's a huge combination because in one side you have technologies being developed that which eventually are out of the money.
Yep.
Then you have money resources where money managers are saying, let's help because we want to invest and we see a competitive edge in this if this could move forward, besides the overall global effect, which will be very beneficial for a continuous sustainable socioeconomic development. And then you have governments which sometimes have the key through policies to enable some of these things to happen. And then you have this mixture of realities when we talk about carbon markets, and the value of carbon, where you start saying, listen, because there is an implicit issue here that needs to be costed, that needs to be spelled out as an economic function, then we generate a huge value around the world for the next 10, 20, 30 years, which would make this transition. Because as you get to the net zero society, then the carbon credit somehow will probably lose its relevance as you have been through this cycle. But how do you finance, and how do you make sure that those projects that they don't look effective from day one, how they become financially, economically effective? Because you cannot develop also something that never gets to a sustainable point from an economic standpoint, because there will not be enough resources for all of that from the government budgets or from subsidies or donations. And then you have also donations. You have a lot of money around the world, which is great, willing to sustain initial steps, to do first losses, and to do something that is good for the overall environment, because some people generated these resources over time and are willing to give back to the system, to society, as a donation. So it's a huge combination. I like, for instance, when you look at the TFFF, which is the Tropical Forest Fund Forever, that Brazil somehow launched, but brings 70 countries together. We're trying to keep the forest up in a new way. So you're offering to investors to have a very decent return on their invested capital, but you're saying, listen, let's donate a portion of that to the countries that hold the forest, because that's much more than today they invest on the forest itself. So it's a big game change, where you find a way to sustainably maintain or improve the forest conditions and the socioeconomic relationship around the forest. And by the way, when you look at forests, which is an essential part of the solution, you have some of the poorest communities around the world living right by the most valuable assets of the world. So how do you balance that? So TFFF is one very smart, very intelligent, well-built way, and that was a combination of ideas of governments, financial systems, business people, scientists, to come up with this very interesting idea, which hopefully will grow a lot in the next few years. It was a good start, around $7 billion committed at COP30, but of course, for this to be a very efficient tool, we probably need much more than that to generate this delta spread, which allows the countries to invest in a better way to keep those forests in the right way.
Yeah, and I remember that, and almost thinking, wait, weren't we talking about this like 25 years ago? And it was really good to see that it was actually took place. It finally came to fruition. And I liked also seeing some of the more innovative things, like for example, de-risking like FX for investments, which was incredible. I hadn't seen anything like that before. And treating the green premium, it's about really creating the demand, right, for these products and these services, right? Because if you look at them, they're more like environmental services. Even if it's like a product, it's a service. At the end of the day, it's an environmental service, and the green premium issue is always a complicated one. But if we can create a market on the back end where these services are valued, or the products that have a place to go to that market more quickly, that's kind of I think the hardest part actually.
Yeah.
And I
And,
wonder if
and
because they're different disciplines many times, maybe the scientist doesn't understand sort of market dynamics, and then vice versa. And how do you value these products, right?
I think carbon is a very good example for that. And honestly, I think everybody understands its piece. But the beauty of working together is then you really put the best solutions together, and you find the gaps that are missing, because my business view doesn't have the scientific required view, doesn't have the financial, the governmental. Um, but when you think about carbon and the way this is moving, it's not ready, but most probably, in my opinion, in the next 4 or 5 years, we will have a very interesting global carbon market, which will be offsetting a lot of these issues and allowing some of the projects that need support from, for instance, the value of carbon to be invested sooner than later, generating critical mass, scale, and then becoming economic per se, which is what you saw in most of the developments over time.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, to me, the urgency of creating a robust, regulated carbon market that's local but also intertwined globally is I mean, if there's a priority on the desk, I mean that one to me is just maximum. And I think that the history of maybe the voluntary carbon market, where we've seen a lot of it gets a bad name, but also if you actually
Yeah,
sit down to look at what happens in the voluntary carbon market, that's where the innovation is happening, right?
yeah,
You get new standards and new methodologies. You get great projects. You get to finance innovation that wouldn't be perhaps that would take decades or a lot of time to bring to market, and it's happening there. But it also gets a terrible name because some bad actors basically tarnish the entire market. And so
and there is an evolution. If you look at Brazil as an example, which is a carbon power uh, potência, as we say in Portuguese, a great place to generate carbon credits. Uh, we just passed the legislation in the year before, in 2025, and now we are regulating in 2026. So there is a process and a time, which of course is challenging because on the other side of the fence we have the climate issue on us. But that's the only way that we are really going to solve the problem is to have all of these systems and connections working and allowing for the offsetting of those issues and problems and to effectively debottleneck. So at the end of the day, I think we are more towards to getting to a good position than towards not getting. But it's a very tense road and it's a narrow space that we have and we have to work very well. That's why we were so concerned with the architecture, with this structure of the process, sometimes a bit more than with the subjects itself, because we believe that if you bring efficiency, if you bring organization to the way you're going to work on those themes, probably your rate of success will be higher than if you didn't have that.
yeah, it's like the time is narrow and the road is muddy, but like we have to get across, right, somehow.
Yeah, yeah.
And I want to stay on that topic really quickly because you just brought it up. It basically references maybe your background in business and managing an international company all over. It's got many employees in all over the world. And what do you think your greatest contribution has been to this to formulating this action agenda? How do you see the business side connecting here?
Oh, I think honestly, the champion position is to listen, to convey, to integrate, because you have this great team of experts. Then you have the United Nations, and then you have the presidencies of the COP, where you have amazing talent. Uh, and I think the what we tried to do is to make sure that we were all hearing each other, and that we were working together. That's also a very important thing. For the first time in COP, the COP30 had a unified action agenda, meaning that presidencies, champions, climate champions team, UN, all working together on the same page. And we're going in the same direction for COP31. And I'm sure this is going to become now the new normal. So that's what gathers all these people around the issue and allow them to work. As I used to tell the initiatives, we are not in a position to say the way to do sustainable aviation fuels is that way. No, we're not. We are in a position to bring everybody to the table. So if we want to talk about green steel, because of our position, because of our connection to COP, we really can bring everybody around the table and share the ideas, the solutions, and try to forge a path. Try. That's what we can do. And that's not a small achievement. That's a fairly sizable achievement because the amount of resources of people, assets, talent, finance, legislation that you can get around the table once you have this sort of common view of where to go. And that's what you do in companies, at the end of the day, in a much smaller scale, but that's what we try to do.
And when you have these all these different entities working together and they're all pulling in different directions, the commitments that a company does, how does that actually work? Are they making a commitment to a specific task? And from a corporate perspective, like what are they actually doing? What are they actually contributing?
Well, usually the initiatives, to be an initiative within the UN perspective, it cannot be a company. It has to be a more horizontal, a cross-segment group, because we don't want to have a biased circumstance or something that favors A versus B. And we don't need necessarily one route only. There could be many routes to getting to a certain solution. But once these organizations they are engaged, they start to bring in the companies that belong to their own organization or to their institution, and that enriches a lot the process. Then, of course, you have ways where the companies commit to things that they will need to do. And the way the countries are working now with the NDCs, at the end of the day, this will become a tree, a reverse tree where you get to this segments and then companies one by one, and they will need to achieve their targets, their results within their sector. But at the higher level here, what we're trying to do is to make sure that the collective action of all these forces are giving the path, the solution, excluding the roadblocks, debottlenecking, for them to, at the end of the day, on their real life, achieve what they need to do. So I like the examples. At the end of the day, let's say company air carrier A needs to buy SAF one of these days to make sure that they are offsetting their carbon, they are reducing their carbon emission. For that, they need available SAF at a competitive rate around the world, close to where they will depart. Why we don't have that now? How can we have that over time? Those are the kind of subjects that we need to work with. And a lot, of course, a lot of the debate, a lot of the negotiation that has been done in the past, a lot of the networking that occurred in the past, that's the essence of what we're going to do now. But now it's the era of implementation. Now we need to get those things done. And we have a time frame for that that has been already agreed for most countries. Like Brazil, for instance, you already have a target to use, I'm using the example here, to use SAF at a certain percentage. So we need to have that availability. And that availability has to be somehow competitive at some point in time to allow us to go to the next degree. And of
Yeah, and
course, the
the
quicker we do that, the best.
and the pressure on just to continue on this example of the airlines, you have Corsia on one end for on the crediting side, then you have SAF on the other side. It's like the squeeze is coming from two very big sides, and the supply on the SAF is a real interesting challenge. And I think that we'll stick on the case of Brazil, where we're both know well, and you have this ethanol market, right? Where you have this, let's say this market of providing fuel, let's say, and what kind of stresses do you see? Can you give any examples of the kind of stress that we're going to be seeing by the additional demand that's going to be coming from SAF?
Yeah, and somehow, for instance, when you think about biofuels, there are so many routes for biofuels that there is a competitive nature per se, where you have to think who is going to be the first taker, who is going to be in the better position to use. The same works for hydrogen. When you think about it, it's a very challenging route, but at some point, the available hydrogen, who is going to be in the position to say, I'm in a better position to be the first user because I have more value to get from this, and that talks a lot to carbon markets as well. So as we get closer to 2030, 2035, those dynamics will be very different from today, where you're going to have more effective values to be offset on your value chain, and you're going to be either a front runner or not a front runner in the possibility or in the need to be using those solutions. And this will generate offtake agreements on a more sizable and more relevant way. What we need to do is to get organized and to move in that direction. The ethanol, the biofuel in Brazil is a very good example. And Brazil itself has to get organized to have infrastructure, to have legislation, to have agreements in place to make sure that we don't lose this opportunity, because goes back to my original point. In my first day in this job, I said, listen, I like socioeconomic development. I need to connect things to socioeconomic development, and this time, sustainable socioeconomic development. So when you look at a place like Brazil, where we would be much better off if we could accelerate our socioeconomic development, we should not lose any of these opportunities. So Brazil is one of these places where you need to be talking about this agenda 24 hours per day, 365 days a year, society overall. And we need to be supportive to government. Government has to be supportive to us to find the solutions which are critical and relevant to achieve this to achieve this market effective out there, so that we can gain some global market share, some value to our country. We need to do that. Biofuels is a very good example, but forest is another great example. Degraded areas, Brazil is a champion in the possibility to revamp those areas. Brazilian companies, the ones that started this, are doing amazingly well in terms of being respected around the world. But what are we going to do? We're going to do the 42 million hectares that we know we could do, or some few thousand hectares. That's the challenge. That will make a huge difference in the development of the country over time.
And in that regard, you're also talking about essentially attracting foreign direct investment, right? You're talking about opening the market to outside players that need to either offset or develop. And many of these solutions, and this isn't, I don't think it's a theory really. It's just really, it's very real. It's ecosystem solutions, right? It expands the market in many ways. I mean, just to go back to the circular economy example we were talking about, right? How many jobs does a landfill produce, right? Or an open air dump? No jobs, right? How many jobs does a circular economy produce on, recycling and composting? And how many more jobs could we get in the pickers market, let's say, for example, or remanufacturing, reindustrialization, all these types of jobs? It's a really big job generator. And in a time
Yeah.
where jobs are at risk, right, where we're looking at serious challenges of many segments of the society being replaced or shifted, right? The idea that you have very clear paths to jobs, and not just jobs, but green jobs. I wonder, that should be a lens also. I think that in your socioeconomic development focus
Yeah.
is super relevant. And looking into Turkey going forward, from a commitments perspective, we were talking about 1.3 trillion. Is that right? Is that number about right? The total
That's
commitment target?
the roadmap from Baku to Belém of available resources around the world on an yearly basis that would have to be achieved. Brazil delivered this document along with the presidency of COP29, and that is now available to the parties. Now we need to make that better. We need to uh, get those 1.3 trillions which were spotted out and bring them into the system. But of course, for that, one thing is to say, okay, I would like to have 1.3 trillion, and by the way, I think I know where to get it. The next thing is that you need to use this 1.3 trillion in a very efficient way, and you have to make sure that wherever you're putting this resource, you have the legislation, the market incentives, the technology, etc., 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 to get those things going. Otherwise, you somehow worked in one piece of the problem. So it's very good. It's very important that we have now the roadmap, but we also have to make sure that we have the places to use the resources.
Are you there in that place where you decide where those resources be going, Dan? Are you?
No, no. I think it's a very organic subject, because either the both the roadmap and the usage is a combination, is a patchwork of so many actors, so many different regions around the world. with very different approaches, legislation, regulation, etc. So I don't think you could have a direction, a global direction on how you use the 1.3 trillion. But I think you can have, again, the process and the tools. We believe that if you got to a point where you have an initiative, you have a plan to accelerate the solution, you're probably very close to being able to have awareness and to use very well resources because you covered a lot of miles. So we bet a lot on the process as the way to achieve that, not in one person or a group of people saying this is the right thing
Yeah.
to do.
I was kidding a little bit, but that's awesome that there is that. I think the clearer the roadmap, the easier it is to fund something. Then
Yeah.
obviously the capital will flow. And how far have we gotten on that 1.3 trillion this year? Are we?
I think in terms of identifying, we're in a very good position. I think now we need to make this combination of making attractive for everybody, both sides, whoever is bringing those funds in and whoever will take those funds out. Otherwise, the equation doesn't work, and then you have an inefficient roadmap because you know the somehow where the money is and who could be using, but you're not linking the parts. So I think maybe that's a personal opinion. We need to work a lot, and that's not governments, that's the remainder of society, on making sure that we generate these very interesting projects that would collect a lot of resources.
Well, I'm hopeful that that's going to happen. So great. And Dan, I mean, I think to conclude this, which has been an amazing conversation, I've learned a lot. Um, what gives you most hope going into Turkey this year? I mean, where do you see the real opportunities, and what's the one thing maybe that's really moved you, let's say, going
I,
forward?
I, I know this is going to sound boring, but it's the process. It's really the process. I don't think any human being, given the amazing array of opportunities and challenges, could be in a position. Let's just use the numbers we have: 482 initiatives. There's no one on earth that could sit down and said, "Oh, those six out of the four." It's a very complex thing, and we could have more initiatives, and we could have much more plans to accelerate solutions than 120. That was just the starting year of the method, of the mechanism or process or architecture, whatever we call it. So honestly, I'm putting a lot of energy to allow this to continue to move forward. Of course, refueling this system and making sure that we are rethinking it every year and at any point in time to make it better. But I really have a very high expectation that as we put so many bright people, talented people, so many resources from science, financial system, etc., governments together, we could have very interesting developments over time. But that's not something for tomorrow morning. Some will happen tomorrow morning. But at the end of the day, we need that curve to occur. And I think we are in a good position to foster that. And that's where I'm putting all of my effort, 100%.
Is there anything that worries you a little bit as well, or more the macro problem?
Anything worries me, of course, but I don't see much solution for that. So I tend not to put much focus on that. I really want to work on what we can get done. And
Yeah.
by the way, as we develop this process, this very interesting architecture, the parties really like that. You know, they are very close to what we're doing because they are seeing a lot of movement of that. So you're in a moment where the world is really different, is really complex. There are so many challenges, but at the same time, maybe we never had such an interesting architecture that works for uh, governmental and non-governmental society. So why not bet on moving further on that direction and be optimistic? Because being pessimistic is not going to
Doesn't
give me
help.
any support. Yeah,
And it's funny because I think what you've built is this architecture of goodwill, right? Or a coalition of the willing is really coalitions of the willing is really about bring together
yeah.
people
I,
and
I,
different
I just need
stakeholders.
to
Yeah,
correct you that
yeah.
I don't think I built or anyone
Oh,
built. It's really those 10 years, at least the 10 years since the Paris Agreement, of working, and basically we look at what was there and we just made some twists and some arrangements, and the others that will come after us will continue to do that.
Yeah.
I think it's normal. Looks like a very old subject, but it's not such an old subject. It's fairly new. Things take some time
Yep.
to happen.
Yep. Wow. Dan, thank you so much.
Thank
This is
you.
you have such a huge role. I don't know how this fits into the history of your life, like the time that you're spending here, how that factors into the whole journey that was your life, but must be fascinating being where you're sitting today, the things that you see, the people you meet, and
Yeah.
thank you for the work that you do. Really, really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, and it's a great honor and pleasure to meet such exciting people and bright people around the world, and governments and business and communities, indigenous and everything. It's amazing, and was a real luck to be in the position to participate and to support the process. And thank you very
Fantastic.
much.
Thank you. Cheers.